OWWR Pod, and by that I mean on Wednesdays we read. I'm Hannah.
I'm Laura.
And we are usually two best friends who do a deep dive into a new book series one book at a time. But some days we're three best friends.
Three best friends.
Wow, because today we're welcoming to the podcast Adam Bassett. Adam, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am Adam Bassett, and I am notorious for always joining in the dialogue on time.
I love that. Was perfect. I loved it. We love someone who comes in before they're even announced. That's our energy. So
I cut people off all the time, so I love it when people are just willing to jump in and talk with us.
It's the mark of a good podcast host.
Exactly.
You just jump in and start yapping.
And Adam is the author of Digital Extremities, and it's a new published book, Animus Paradox. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your books?
Yeah, so I am a UX and UI designer. I work for Campfire, and we make writing software, and we have a reading app as well. And aside from that, I do some commissions on the side for map design. I'm actually currently working with an indie author right now on a map for his book, which is very fun. And for my own personal work, I've been writing and recently publishing some kind of near future cyberpunk short books. The first one, Digital Extremities, is a kind of sci-fi slice of life short story collection. Basically, the initial idea behind it was, what if we had a cyberpunk society like you see in, the classic Neuromancer or the more recent Cyberpunk 2077, but we put it in rural and remote places. I just never seen that before. I thought it would be interesting, and so it took a while, but eventually I wrote a book about it. With that
and
kind
it
of
was
idea.
excellent.
It was excellent. Laura and I are the first people to say we love a rural setting because we both grew up in rural America. So it's very important to kind of show that stuff. So
yeah, I grew up in northern New York, right near the Canadian border. I've actually been to some of the places in those stories. They all take place in different locations. The second one is Hemingford. That's maybe an hour away from where I grew up. They have a pub there with really good fish and chips. But yeah, that's the short story collection, Digital Extremities. Animus Paradox was the other one you mentioned. That one, probably by the time you're listening to this, has just come out.
Comes out today.
It comes out today, then. Perfect.
Congratulations. Happy Pub Day. It's going
Thank
so
you.
well. It's just flying off the shelves. We're going to manifest that.
God, I hope so. That'd be fun. Animus Paradox is a little bit different. It is a story set in the same world. It actually picks up right at the end of the final story of Digital Extremities. But you don't need to have read one or the other to enjoy it. They are definitely standalone books. And Animus Paradox leans much more into the kind of classic cyberpunk thriller side of things, where there's going to be a lot of shootouts and sword fights and some hacking and a whole bunch of crazy stuff like that going on. Very action-packed, but also trying to take time to step back and sort of reflect on what's going on as well. So it's been super fun. That's been my life for the last couple months. It's been nonstop.
Both your books were amazing. Laura and I read. We binged both of them, and we loved them. So everyone should be going out and getting those books to fly off the shelves, especially in this Paradox today. But can you tell everyone a little bit, taking a step back? Tell us a little bit about you as a reader. The favorite books you had as a child, inspirations for your own writing, things like that.
Yeah. So favorite book growing up was honestly, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the Warrior Cat series by Erin Hunter.
Yes,
that's the Laura one.
Yay!
That I would credit that with the series that really got me into reading. Everybody was excited about their Harry Potters And I was like, nah, I'm allergic to cats, so I want to live vicariously through this book.
You chose
The fantasy
wisely.
was being around cats.
I'm
In
sure that's
retrospect, you won that war. So
That's
uh
amazing.
yeah, so I mean that's probably where I credit my interest in reading starting, just because those were such fun books for me, especially at the time. And that's where I started writing. I didn't know it was fanfic at the time, but I would write my own little cat stories about different cat clans, and it was very silly and cringy looking back on it, but it got the job done, and it got me interested in writing. And I'm very thankful for having read that series in the first place. Um, I think the second major book I would shout out is probably it's much different. It's Devil's Keep by Philip Finch, and that's sort of more like a adult military, like covert ops kind of thriller situation. Like I think I don't know if this was a while ago I read it. I don't remember if it was like a active or a former like Black Ops team or something. They get a whiff of something weird going on, and the entire book there's like this countdown happening, and you don't know what it's for until maybe two-thirds of the way through the book, where everything kind of clicks, and it's like,
I
oh
love that.
that's
no.
perfect.
And it was just like, something I picked up on a whim. I had kind of fallen off reading at that point, but that book, like the mystery of it and the action in it, just like really sparked something in me, and that kind of was my gateway back into reading.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Did that answer the question? I kind of got lost in the.
Absolutely.
No,
Okay.
that definitely.
I actually love that you chose a book that you liked as a child and then one that got you back into reading, because I feel
Mhm.
like a lot of people just heavily focus on like childhood favorites, but those books that really get you back into reading are so important. Even if they're like not books that you're like super gaga about,
Mhm.
I think that it's so important to highlight those books that really kind of are catalysts for getting you back into the hobby.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and like, I would never quote the Warrior series as being an inspiration for necessarily anything that I'm working on now. But, without that series, I don't know if I would have gotten into writing at the same time or in a similar way. I mean, my
I also think
family.
it's fascinating just based on like the covers, and that you now make covers. I'm like, I think those have great covers too. So that
Oh, I
it's
don't
all
make
making sense.
I don't make the covers. I make the maps and
Oh,
books
just the
sometimes.
maps. Okay.
I do some like the lettering on covers sometimes. Like, um, so for Animus Paradox, my friend Ahmed made the illustration, and then I did all of the text kind of around that. Same deal for Digital Extremities. I brought in somebody, Ixel did the illustration for that one, and then I did kind of everything after that. Um, which is kind of funny. Like the illustration that Ixel did, um, I apologize to any listeners who were not able to see the book, but the way that she made it did not leave a lot of room for a title. Like I couldn't put one across the top third very easily, especially
Hmm.
like with the different color contrasts. And so I was kind of forced to do a title along the side. And now with this has become a series, kind of unintentionally, but here we are. Now there's kind of like a visual language with a
Yeah,
I
title on the
I dig
side
the
and
title down the
everything.
side.
I think that's like it sets it apart, especially for sci-fi. I feel like
Hmm.
sci-fi it's so like it does give it that futuristic text feeling to it, which is
Hmm.
good because this is a
Yeah.
futuristic book.
Yeah, I feel like, fantasy leans very much toward like whatever is old, and then sci-fi kind of allows you to play a little bit more in some respects. Um, but I mean, as long as it looks good at the end of the day, you can kind of do whatever you want.
Well, getting into your writing process a little bit, can you tell us about that, and maybe even share a little bit what it was like to make a change in your writing to go from short stories to a longer form story?
Yeah, so short stories are, I think, kind of my default. Those are probably what I feel most comfortable doing. I was trying to write a longer novel for a few years before I wrote Digital Extremities, and it just kind of like felt like beating my head against the wall for a solid 2 years. And it got to a point where it's like nothing is getting done. So I need to go back to what I feel comfortable with, and that was short stories. And I kind of already at that point had the concept for Digital Extremities. I just didn't quite know what it was going to become yet. And so I just sort of kept working on that. I would say that's sort of where, like I said, that's my default. That's kind of where I feel comfortable. That's probably because of a lot of like, academic writing and storytelling and stuff. Like I took undergrad level short story classes, and it's just easier to share short work in general, I find. It's a lot easier to ask somebody, hey, can you check out this 5,000 word short story versus, hey, I'm writing this 7 books long series of all epic fantasy novels. It's like, I love those too, but they're a huge time commitment. And so with shorter work being more comfortable for me, and that knowledge of shorter work being more accessible, especially when you are a little bit more unknown like I am, all that kind of lines up really nicely in my head of like, this just makes the most sense to me. Now going from Digital Extremities to Animus Paradox, which is a much longer story, but it is still short as far as a novel goes. It's 45,000 words, which is like just a little bit above novella, and probably just a little below what most people would consider a novel. It's in a really weird, ambiguous place.
Yes.
But that was really fun too, because that picks up at the end of one of the stories in Digital Extremities, and sort of a thread of a plot in there that really didn't matter to that story, but sort of existed in the background. And an editor of mine, BK, he was like, hey, what happens here? I was like, I'm not going to tell you in this story, because it makes no sense to go into that space. But the idea kind of stuck around in my head, and it ended up becoming this much larger plot with, trying to find this thief who then, I knew that I wanted it to be a longer story because I didn't want to do a whole new short story collection around this one idea. And I knew that from some early responses to Digital Extremities, I knew that there were some people who just wanted something that was a little bit longer. But of course, I didn't want to write a big novel. So,
Yet. There's still time,
yeah.
Adam.
No, that fantasy one is still kicking around in my mind. I would love to do something with that. But I really like these short novels, short stories for this cyberpunk world that I have, because I don't know, it feels like short and punchy, and you're still able to, I think, convey a lot within that space.
Absolutely.
I mean, there were definitely parts in the plotting of Animus Paradox where I was like, oh, this is too short. I have to like add an obstacle for them to overcome, or like I had to consciously think about, how do I make this longer a lot?
So, would you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser?
It depends on the story.
Okay.
So I think the best example I can give is probably like, there were stories in the short story collection where I genuinely went in with almost no thoughts. It was just a vibe, and then eventually, after enough time, something came out of it. I think, for example, the 6th story, I think it was, The Beast of Longyearbyen, is kind of a little bit of like a detective-ish story where there were like rumors of a monster and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thought I had going into that was just, The Beast of Longyearbyen sounds like a really cool title. And then like that of course led down different avenues, and I really liked the idea of some kind of like monster hunter in the near future setting. And what does the town of Longyearbyen, which is like 2,000 people population, this little Norwegian town up in the Arctic Circle, like extremely remote, very harsh, very few resources even. Like I
Mhm.
don't, there might be a hospital there. I'm not sure off the top of my head. There's like one grocery store. It's really limited options. For a lot of things, you have to fly back to the mainland to get something. Um, so what does that look like, in the early 21st century or early 22nd century? And after, there's been some light ocean level rising
Mhm.
and changes to the climate and stuff. It's like, well, at least in the book, the way that I ended up going, Longyearbyen actually fares pretty well, and it like thrives, and it's become a city. And so, what is a city in this remote Arctic Circle island, like in the middle of these mountains, look like? And so it was just a lot of vibes for that. And then eventually, I found my footing and ended up going somewhere with it. Whereas Animus Paradox was like, I went into it knowing, okay, this is the problem. There is this thief. I have to find them. Uh, and I went through and just like plotted almost everything, and it really did not change very much from that point to the end. So the short answer to your question is extreme variance.
Well, I'm
Well,
getting a little bit of vibes of the when there's more of a myth involved, there's more of a pantsing, let's go with the flow situation. And
Mhm.
when there's more like there's a little more technology, a little more action, I need to plan this out.
I would. That's interesting. I would have to write more stories to figure that out.
Yeah. That's just kind
um,
of the vibe I was getting there.
yeah, no, I can see it. I would. I mean, that's just also part of how I write. Is like when I was first starting, the very first story that I wrote was also the first story in uh, Digital Extremities, Alone
That's a
Together.
rough one.
yeah, I
Yep.
was like, what a rough one to start with. You're like, I think I'm going to be a writer. Let me look into this.
Let me rip out somebody's heart.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that is undeniably the toughest story to get through. That's part of why it's the first one in the collection, because it's like if you can
Yeah.
get through this, you are fine. Nothing else is really this bad. Um, but that was the very first one that I wrote, and it took a lot of different forms because I was still figuring out what this world is like. I didn't like plan out the setting in some world building document somewhere. I like to figure these things out through the characters, and I didn't know even who those characters were yet. I just liked the idea of like, it's a cyberpunk story set in the late 21st century. Is this one, and it takes place in Burlington, Vermont, which is today a small town of or city of like 60,000, I think. So like not the most remote place, but also it's not even close to a normal city that a lot of people are used to. Um, and what does that look like? So that story was written and rewritten over the course of probably like 4 years, as I just
Wow.
tried to figure out what this setting was. By the time I get to Animus Paradox, I have a much better idea of what the setting is. I know who those characters are because I met them in the short story collection when I was writing that. And so it was almost very breezy of just like these are all the pieces. I just need to see how they fit together.
That's awesome.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out and you're not letting me.
Well, I will say
Yeah.
that your world building is like super unique because it is like this dystopian world, but you also kind of bring in the effects of climate change, like you said, with the rising sea levels. And there's also like this underlying current of like change with like corporations or healthcare and
Mhm.
how that all works in the future. So what was it like creating this like very futuristic world and incorporating some of the realities of our world into it? Like how did you navigate all that?
Yeah, it was really easy, not a problem at all. Um, I mean, we talk about all this stuff as it like we say I don't think it's dystopian. I think it's a slight exaggeration, and I say slight exaggeration on what's happening right now. There's you
Maybe
mentioned the
that's why
health.
I viewed it as dystopian.
I mean, we can have that argument too. I mean, you mentioned healthcare. That's not a major deal in the stories. It's just something that kind of comes up occasionally of like, there's a character who's a surgeon that occasionally has to deal with insurance and stuff. And you'll get an offhand reference of like this person's only on the silver premium plus extra plan or something like that. And it's like, we already have that. Like that's a real issue that's happening right now. I just added some premiums and pluses and stuff to the name of the thing to make it sound even better, but it's not. um, and with like the climate change stuff, this is already happening. There's a massive ice shelf in Antarctica that is melting far faster than anyone expected, and it's basically irreversible at this point. How bad is it going to get? I don't really know. Um, I think we're going to see in some places that it's going to get worse, and that's, I depict that in the book. But in some places, like in, the example of Longyearbyen, I don't think it's going to necessarily hit as hard because it's already such a cold place. If the climate changes, then, that in theory warms up a little bit more. And we have, the coastline of Longyearbyen, from my understanding of it, is a little bit severe. It's not like a steady, you know, lazy beach or something. It's like a rocky sort of cliffside. And so if the water goes up, let's say 3 feet roughly, I don't think that is affected a great deal. Of course, then you look at a place like, you know, the southeastern part of the UK, and it's like those lowlands are so flat that's just going to get flooded immediately. Um, so it's really just kind of like what is happening right now? What do we know is coming toward us, and what parts of it make sense for this particular story to possibly like exaggerate a little bit. In Animus Paradox, for example, a big thing is the water. Everybody has access to water, but it's not quality water. You have to purify it basically.
Mhm.
And that is a running theme throughout the story. And if you're wealthy enough, if you want to splurge a little bit, you can buy Antarctic fresh water, which is ice from Antarctica that they've taken and shipped up into other countries. There's an offhand line about like, oh,
Tying it all together.
yeah, yeah. So like these are all things that it's a slight exaggeration on what's already happening. I mean, we already see people kind of eyeing a place like Antarctica and wanting to um, profit off of it in some way. It might not be the ice, it might be oil, or it might be ores or something like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, that's the vibe. Um, and so, the stories are about people living their own lives, looking for that thief, or trying to help their dad out with something, or whatever the case may be. But in the background, this other stuff is still going on.
Yeah, it's absolutely realistic too. It's like you said, it's just kind of going further into like the questioning of what will come. Well, it could be this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. But another thing you do so well is you leave your stories and your plots a little open-ended for readers, and it's one of my absolute favorite
My
things.
favorite.
So could you talk to us a little more about that and like why you decided to write your stories in this specific way where readers had to interpret a little more?
I think I'm kind of like you in the sense that I just think that's fun.
Mhm.
I have had people in the past tell me that I do it too much, so I have tried to tone back a little bit
Oh
here and
no, I
there.
love it. Keep it up.
Like
Um,
all of my favorite things is when you just don't know what happens, and
Mhm. Like at the end of every chapter, it's like, okay.
yeah, no, I mean, I think I've always just been interested in that style of storytelling, and writing more, especially recently. I've kind of, I guess I've realized that more and like what I like about it, which is just the idea that the story continues beyond the page. Like
Mhm.
you may be done reading about this particular moment in their lives, but it's not like a um what's the term? Like a window box? Is that like a real thing? I don't,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
like okay. I don't know
A
what I'm
shadow box or like what
shadow
you,
box.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you.
there we
yeah.
go.
It's not like a shadow box where it's everything is contained neatly in this one thing. It's like you can see stuff bleeding in from the outside, and you can see how things on the inside are bleeding out beyond the borders and stuff. And you know the whole picture might not be clear. You can only see this one part of it, but I think it's really important to have to build that sense of like a larger world and a larger existence that these characters have to be able to suggest that this is not just the end. It's just part of their story.
I love that.
Plus, it
It's
leaves it
so
open
good.
ended if I ever want to come back to them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I did wonder if that was ever going to happen, if we were going to get like someone from, because like you also jump years throughout this, so it's so
Yes.
interesting to kind of see that. And I would like want to, I was constantly like, I wonder if there are Easter eggs that this is like the same lineage or what's going on here. So it got me to get out my what is it, like the knitting needle for the threads where I could connect it all together. I
Like
was
the Charlie
the
Day
Charlie
meme.
Day. I
Yeah.
was Charlie Day memeing all over when I was reading it, where I was like, are they connected?
It's not that deep,
There are some connections
but
though.
Yeah.
there are a few connections. There's a lot of like little small references that I think are pretty easy to miss if you are just skimming or not necessarily aware that they might exist. There's a lot of like companies that come up every now and
Yeah.
then, or like
Hmm.
a product that one person uses and a different person sees advertised, or like little things like that to try and make the world feel a little more whole.
Yeah.
Um, the biggest thing like what we're talking about where there is a continuation is probably Animus Paradox itself, where it is a whole new book based on, well, not based on, but continuing a story from the collection where we revisit David and Math, and we get to see them go off on the short story was a more uh, just detective-y, like where is the kid? Got to go find him sort of adventure. And nobody's ever in any significant danger for the most part. Whereas like at any point someone's going to get shot in this in Animus
I was
Paradox.
gonna say things
Yeah.
really ramp up.
Oh,
Yeah,
they
they
do,
really
yeah.
do. Well, we know that you wrote Animus Paradox as kind of like a continuation, but were there any other themes or characters in the stories of Digital Extremities like that you feel the most connected to?
um I really feel connected to the protagonist in Buying Time. He is the sort of nameless, he's the only first person uh, chapter within the entire collection. Um, and he's just a guy trying to find something in life. Like he's just sort of working, and he's sort of sold his body to the company for a limited number of years to get like this uh, implant on his arm that helps him be more efficient with work as a glass blower, and produce more things quickly. And the whole thing kind of leaves him very stuck. And I've definitely felt that feeling of just, things aren't necessarily going bad, but I feel like I'm not going anywhere either. And, just that whole story felt really, really close to home in a lot of ways to me.
Mm.
Um, I don't, now that doesn't mean that I
That
have
doesn't mean coworkers watch out.
No, no, no. And it doesn't mean either that like I'm necessarily interested in going back to that character. I have a connection to that story, but I also feel like that story did what it was trying to do.
Mhm.
So like, when we talk about expanding on anything, it's like, does this actually need more
Mhm.
expanding? Is there more that I could say with it? I'll say right now, um, I do have some more ideas for this setting, and there are some connections to the current stories in them, but they are not any of the current point of view main characters.
Mm.
We would be exploring new places and new things. So, and that's just part of like me, and like the part of what I enjoy about writing is that sense of finding a new thing to go explore and learn about, and um, just see what it's like.
I think it's interesting that that's the one that connects with you the most because that's definitely one of the harder hitters of the story
Yeah.
collection. I think, but just kind of getting into like the focus of a lot of the stories is the use of modifications to oneself and the complexities of it. So, how do you feel about the way that these modifications are used within your writing, and how do you kind of see them being implemented in the future, like within our own world?
I mean, again, it's kind of already happening. Uh, it's funny. The big thing that's happening right now, that the most noticeable thing that's happening right now, is all the implementation of AI into everything, and
Mhm.
that's like the one piece of technology I did not even remotely explore.
I know, I it
um,
was interesting how that was kind of left out.
yeah, no, that's probably a mistake, if I'm being honest. I may have to do something with that in a future book, but I mean, aside from that, I mean, I could blur the lines a little bit and say like, oh, well, these augmentations to people's limbs and bodies in different ways, like the contact lens things that they use to pull up information, sort of like a Google Glass or Apple Vision sort of situation. All of that might have AI working in the background.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I feel
I
like
wouldn't be
that is
Yeah.
surprised.
easy. Or just like, hey, you set these in rural settings. Like AI was just more used in like company factory
Yeah,
setting.
yeah. I mean,
Yep.
that's
That's an
entirely a
easy
possibility
blur.
too. But I mean, again, like you ask about the similarities and stuff. Like, I mean, the way that I described the lenses is through the context of Google Glass and Apple Vision Pro. Is like these things are already out there. We already have the most dramatic things are probably like I mentioned there was a character who had like this augmentation on his arm,
Hmm.
basically like to deflect or absorb heat from a furnace and stuff. Later in the stories and in Animus Paradox, because those all take place further in the future, you start to see like much more cybernetic stuff going on. It looks a lot more like what you would expect from cyberpunk stories, with cosmetic modifications and a whole bunch of like utility things. There's a whole bunch of like military mods and stuff. Like pretty much everybody at that point is modded in some way. But again, like even that is based on a cochlear implant, or the lenses really don't change a whole lot. There's one character who gets like bionic eyes, um, but like a lot of that is a work in progress or exists right now in some form anyway. So and I think that's part of like I had somebody read an early version of all these stories who had, I don't think she had ever read Cyberpunk. I don't know if she'd ever read sci-fi, maybe. Um, but that was like the big question I had for her, was like, do you get this? Like, does this all make sense to you as somebody who was not familiar with like the concepts laid down by William Gibson and stuff like that? Um, and she had no problem with it, or she told me she had no problem with it. Um, like, I think the fact that it is so rooted in current technology and uses fairly uh, simplistic, like modern names for all these things, um, I think that has been a real big help for me to help onboard like uh, readers who are not as familiar with the genre, which has been really nice.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite modification or one you felt was like the most useful or fun to play around with?
I think the most useful has to be the lens
Hmm.
because it just is so versatile. Like at one point, there's a story where we see characters like pulling up maps on it and stuff, like very basic stuff you can do on your phone. You can text on it. You can. There's one character who like transcribes a book using its camera and like beams that to their laptop or something. Um, which was I think that one was a little bit self-indulgent. It's like, man, this would be really cool. um so I think that's the most useful. The one that I like the most, it it might be the heat sink,
Mm.
which that nameless protagonist has in the third story. Basically like this device in one of his arms that just like sucks the heat out of a room, and shields him from it. And it's just it's a very specific application, but I can see like in a lot of different situations where it could be very useful. Like, if it's unlikely in the future at this point, like that there would be people mining instead of robots, but in like deep underground situations where it's very hot and pressurized or something, like for his particular job, he was around furnaces a lot. I don't know, just like that's one of those things where it's like it's useful, and I don't think I've seen just a device that soaks up heat as a major like modification or feature in a cyberpunk story. Um, I don't know.
You have a
No,
lot
that's
of unique
awesome.
ones, really. And I feel like it seems like totally believable too that if this type of modification technology was like available widespread, that it would really quickly become weaponized by the military and put on the black market and used in illegal activities like what occurs in Animus. Within the world that you are writing, do you think it's possible to avoid corruption in regards to these advanced technologies?
um, no.
Sad. Wah, wah.
um,
Oh, come on.
I mean, it's the whole thing of like these things are all tools and people are going to use them the way they're going to use them, and there are ways in which they can be used well and there's ways in which they can be used poorly. I think again AI is an excellent example of this because
Hmm.
AI can be extremely helpful in certain tasks that are monotonous and analyzing data or whatever, like things like that, I think. But then people are using it in the arts to generate illustrations or writing or what have you. And I think that is a explicitly terrible way to use it because that's, theft.
Hmm.
Yep.
um, and I don't think we need to get into that. I'm sure you guys and your listeners are fully
Our listeners are the
heard.
best, so
Yeah.
they have all of
You've
the best
you've
morals.
you've all heard enough about that. I don't need to ramble about it. But I think it is for that reason a really good example of like a modern or maybe futuristic tool. Like I think if we can use AI to help translate things, like that is such an incredibly powerful and helpful thing to help people communicate and share ideas. Like I think one of the benefits of the internet at large has been making the world smaller and helping us connect with people from other cultures. Like, my parents grew up in northern New York and they didn't really know anyone outside of that community. And it's all like very, just rural American, like maybe you go up to Canada a little bit here and there, but that wasn't like a super regular thing. Whereas now, like, you know, my day job, I have multiple coworkers over in Europe, and I talk with them very frequently. My cover artist for Animus Paradox is Egyptian. Like, we live in such an interconnected world now, and I think that's very uh, powerful and very impressive. But again, you come back to, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's also allowed people to create very large echo chambers,
Hmm.
which is also not good. So I don't
Well,
know.
I think you look at that really effectively because like there were so
Yeah.
many different parts when I was reading the books where at some point I was like, oh my gosh, like these mods, they're almost like gender affirming or like just like person
Hmm.
affirming where
Yeah.
like people could modify certain things to feel more themselves.
Hmm.
And that was beautiful. But then you also had discussions about like bodily autonomy when it comes to these modifications and when do you no longer possess certain pieces of yourself and what is yours and what isn't. So I thought
Yeah.
that was just like such a rad way to look at it and you did it in such an effective way.
Yeah, I almost wish I delved into that deeper because I agree it's such like an interesting topic and I never really had time, especially in like Animus Paradox where this comes up the most, um, to really delve into it much. Uh, I don't
I
know.
mean, you
Maybe
do a little
that's
bit with David though. So like without getting
Yeah.
like too spoily,
yeah.
can you talk to us a little more about like David's experience? Because I'll try not to spoil too much. He's ex-military and has
Hmm.
had a lot of modifications, some that are now unusable. And he really has mixed emotions about those modifications and like what he's done and everything. So can you maybe get a little bit more into that specific character and some of the complications there?
Yeah. So I think David is really interesting because, I mean, kind of like you said, because he is so conflicted about sort of what he is. Um, he is, this ex-military person in the military installed into him a whole bunch of different mods, some of which are just useful in general. Like, um, he has cybernetic eyes, which for the most part are just kind of normal eyes, but every now and then he can like zoom in on something, or he's got some like advanced scanning equipment or something. Um, a lot of them are disconnected or like turned off by the military before he left service, because obviously, like if you install a big knife into somebody's wrist, that's really handy when they're fighting for you, but a civilian with that big knife is not super ideal. Um,
It's a pretty big liability.
yeah, yeah. And he has other stuff too that he's able to do, which we get into like the cyberpunk hacking and everything like that. And all of that stuff is like still a part of him, but just completely inaccessible when we begin the story. And there are moments at different times where it's like, if I just had this ability, I could solve this problem like right now. And this problem would be a good thing to solve. But to turn on these mods, or like to get someone to help me turn them on, is very illegal. And if he's currently living in Italy at the time, if the Italian government didn't come after him, the American government probably would.
Yeah.
Mhm.
um, because he is originally American. He just moved over there at some point. Um, so yeah, I mean that is kind of like a thing that's kind of brewing throughout a lot of the story. It comes up a few times. There is a point at which like he is uh, forced to basically either accept that he does not have the power to do something or to turn them on, and he has to make a call into like which of those is he comfortable with doing. Um, to say much more would be spoilers.
Yeah,
Well,
we're really on the line here.
Yeah.
and in Animus Paradox, I feel like you have a lot of like these different groups of individuals who like come together due to immediate needs or just because like there are certain like factions that are interplaying and there's like infighting. Like what made you kind of decide to build those types of like group dynamics throughout the book in Animus Paradox?
um, I just think it's interesting to have a situation where there's multiple groups kind of all fighting for similar things, but all kind of going about it in different ways, or who have personal gripes against one another, and so they refuse to work together in some way. Um, maybe one person's primary goal conflicts with somebody else's primary goal, even if like their secondary goals are the same. Because like I don't think necessarily there are there's no like strictly bad people in Animus Paradox. Everybody kind of has some redeeming quality. Um, maybe not all the time, but um, but I don't know. I like writing that kind of character where, it's not pure black or white. It's, I mean, it's on a large scale somewhat gray, and there's this maybe not miscommunication, but misalignment that causes them to butt heads.
I had a question about morally gray characters, and I'm just going to throw that one out.
You love writing it, so.
So, interpretation of a situation or the twisting of a narrative to benefit certain groups is brought up in Animus. I was kind of wondering why it was important for you to show that the truth can sometimes be based on a person's point of view and their own interpretation of the situation.
I mean, isn't that just the way it is?
I mean, I guess, but I just thought it was just like so interesting to bring that up because I feel like a lot of people just see it as black and white. This is the truth, this is not.
Yeah.
But the story does an excellent job of showing how, well, and there's a specific moment too where they're talking about vengeance, and I can't remember what the story was saying. There's a specific word, like a Japanese term that's used, and how they're talking about this story and how it, like, the story is kind of twisted to fit a certain situation. I thought that was just so well done.
Yeah, is that the book that gets discussed?
I think it might be.
Like okay, yeah. That was kind of like initially a throwaway line, if I'm being honest, and then I would go like I did a little bit of research on because the book that's mentioned, I want to say it's Ikigai.
That sounds right.
Yes, I actually conveniently just flipped to the correct page. That's awesome. Yeah, so there's a reference in Animus Paradox to this book called this concept called Ikigai, which is based on a real book. You can get it today called Ikigai, and it was kind of like just me trying to get a common Japanese phrase or saying or like something that I could have this character sort of weave into the conversation, and it would bring in some of their culture and relate to the story in some way. And it was very kind of like seat of your pants. Like I was 100% pantsing at this point. And then I started digging into the actual book, and I found out that it was written by two Spaniards. And I just thought that was like such an interesting thing for like this concept that, to my knowledge, is known as a Japanese concept to have originated or been written about in some way by these Spanish people who spent time in Japan. And then now imagine this is like 150-ish years in the future. Now, how does this character interpret that information? How has it been muddied over the years and distorted to fit different narratives and all that kind of stuff? So like, it's not just this is a real thing that I learned about and put into the book and all that, but it's also like, how does this exist in this particular time in this particular world? And I think that's really interesting to play with, like, how do people interpret information? Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Did you have any characters in either book that you felt like it was difficult to like write them, or they were like someone where you struggled with their next step? And like, if so, like who and why?
I think I have two answers. There was one that I definitely had trouble with, and one that I unintentionally had trouble with. um, the more fun story is the unintentional one. That was the seventh story. That was external memory. It's about this woman named Kristen, and she is dealing with a problem with her father, who his external memory modification kind of backfires in some way, and they try to fix it, but it's not quite working right. That kicks off a whole thing, and it's very much like, you know, the whole story is basically like your parents getting up in age, and all of a sudden, like there's a moment where you realize that, just in this world that happens in the form of a piece of tech malfunctioning. Um, so he has an attendant. It's a robot named Peabody, and he's just a fun little guy. Or I shouldn't say he. It's a genderless. They.
Yeah.
Um, Peabody is just kind of there all the time, always being like overly helpful, um, and it was more distracting or maybe endearing than I was expecting. So in the early versions of that story, I sent it off to my developmental editor, and he responded, and he starts talking about like, different suggestions that he would make. And then I had to kind of stop him. I'm like, who's the main character of this story? He's like, oh, it's Peabody. I'm like, what? Like, yeah, the main character's the robot, right? Like, no. So I actually ended up having to rewrite that story. I kept pieces of the original, but I ended up rewriting most of it so that the actual main character, Kristen, would be perceived as the main character.
That's amazing, actually.
Excuse me, release the Peabody cut, because
Yeah.
Oh man, I don't even know if I have that anymore. I might have to look. That was a much sadder version of the story, I will say.
Oh, okay.
That was rougher. I at the same time of revising it, I was also realizing the collection was very sad, and I wanted a couple that, especially toward the end, could kind of be a little more uplifting.
I feel like even though that one is somewhat heartwarming, it still has these undertones of sadness to it, though.
No, I was not fully successful.
I think that sometimes you get them with unopened. Like, I feel like unopened is always like a little bit sadder, just
It's
because
still
you have to
handled
like,
with a lot of care.
yeah, yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time writing happy endings. What can I say?
Well, can I ask you about specifically a group that's mentioned in Digital Extremities and then just like a little bit mentioned in Animus, the divers? They're like
Yeah.
really fascinating. Can you tell our listeners more about them and like the inspiration for them?
So in my stories, there are these people who can dive into the net, the cyberspace, whatever you want to call it, and they are in this story called divers because of that sort of description of going headfirst into the net and being like air quotes submerged in it, not being able to come out until you fully leave the net. Uh, they are just heavily based on like net runners from Gibson's original stories and everything. Cyberpunk 2077 was an inspiration in a lot of ways. Um, they're I think the divers in these stories are a little bit more heavily modified than a lot of other cyberpunk fiction I've seen. Like, they are basically more cybernetic than organic human. Like, you could make an argument that these are robots at sometimes. There's a character that we meet in Animus Paradox who is a diver, La Ragna, and they are like so fully immersed in the net that they almost have lost their humanity in the real. And well, like their humanity, their identity, like all these different things. And it's just a very interesting kind of character to write. I have a hard time saying it's a whole lot different than some of these other interpretations of it, but they are much more heavily modified. But they're also like, they're a side character in all these stories because, the original focus of the world was like, what are the normal people doing? And these are like extraordinary people. They are like on the front lines of invisible wars that are happening in the net, and they are
Which is fascinating.
yeah, they are like the Jedi basically.
yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I love thinking about the net because recently someone pointed out that like Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't know what World Wide Web is. Like, it's never been put into context that we used to call it the World Wide Web or
Yeah.
www dot. And I've been thinking about that so often. Like, I don't know why that made me feel old because I've
I was
never
gonna
been a
say the
person.
daily shock of feeling old.
I'm not a person who ever feels old with stuff because I'm like, oh yeah, things progress. That's normal. You should never feel like that. But for some reason, WW dot like threw me for the biggest loop of my life. Where I was like, you mean they don't know that we used to call it the World Wide Web? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, uh, that's all. Well, these books are fantastic. Laura and I both adore them
Spectacular.
so much. Can you share a little bit about your publishing journey and like what made you decide to go into like self-publishing, like indie publishing type thing instead of, traditional things like that for all of our listeners who are thinking
Yeah.
about their
Well,
own works and everything.
yeah, of course. Well, thank you both for checking them out, and I'm glad you enjoyed it so much.
Oh, so good.
Um, for me, I just had no faith that publishers or agents would pick these up. Um, they don't follow any current trends in publishing at the moment. To say they are not romantasy. um,
Those books are
and
popular right now, are they? What are you talking about?
um, and I was really interested in getting some work out there as almost like a resume. Like here, like so, I've mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, I had this idea for a fantasy story that I would like to return to at some point. It would be really nice to return to that, write it, and have the option to submit to agents and be able to show them, hey, I can do this job. I have this published work. Here are these reviews for it, all that kind of stuff. And that's not necessarily what I'll do. But it is a thought in my mind of like, long term, I think getting some work out now and of course making sure like it's well edited and is enjoyable and all that kind of stuff. I'm not shortcutting anything right now. Like I'm looking for the best possible cover artist for these books. I'm looking for the best possible editors. I'm making sure that each book has a variety of editors to make sure that if one person misses something, somebody else can pick it up. It is not cheap. Um, I I think I've made $10 this month and I'm thrilled about it. um, and this is like, I don't want to put anything out there that's going to be seen as cheap. I don't want to put anything out there that I am going to look back on in 5 or 10 years and regret. And this is just the way that I have been able to do that. There are other ways to do that. And, if you're listening and you're like, oh, well, I don't have the money to invest in something right now, you can always update stuff later. Like I've seen, I think, two different people recently, just this month, announce like new covers for existing works. Like you can always go back and improve things, especially with the way self-publishing is right now. Like, it's free to update a listing of your ebook. And I think, depending on who you do a print publishing deal with, it might be free, it might be like $50 or something, but like at the end of the day, it's not too big of a deal to make changes. So
And to be fair, trad authors are making changes all the time too. And
yeah,
just like just in case anybody's like worried about stuff that they've put out that they're not like the happiest with. I know we had Martha Wells on recently.
Gosh.
I guess not recently. It's been 2 years now.
Yeah.
And she was talking about re-releasing some of her own works because she was like,
Mhm.
yeah, I wanted to make some updates because I wasn't too happy with the way some of the
Because
things
I wrote
had.
it in the 80s and 90s, and I'm amazing, and
Yeah.
I'm Martha Wells, and it's not up to my standards anymore. And you're like, yeah, that makes sense. We accept that. Thank you. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for republishing those. uh,
yeah,
yeah, I am remiss because we talked about this when we were off air, and I have to talk about it again so that people know because that's rude. You have some of the best action scenes I've read in a really long time.
oh, thank
I
you.
blank out during action scenes so quickly. They, for some reason, they just like don't hit my pattern recognition for reading, and I'm always like, I just actually need to know what happened after the fight. Like I need someone who's like, during the fight, this is what happens. And I'm like, great news. I know exactly what happened now.
Here's what you
Thank
missed on Glee.
Yeah, I need a here's what you missed on Glee. Can you talk to us a little bit about like how you crafted your action scenes? Because they were really effective.
Yeah, so I knew that chapter 14 was going to be basically all action, and I knew that you were going to skip over all of it. So I really had to like dial it in and make sure, like, I left myself little notes like, Hannah's going to see this. I need her to focus right now.
Hannah, focus up. You need to know what's happening.
Yeah, so I went into those action scenes a little bit nervous myself, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, coming from Digital Extremities, you know, anybody who's read that will know that it's not necessarily the first place that I go. I'm not against doing action scenes. I really do enjoy them. But I think
A
a
little
lot
bit of
of
action, Digital Extremities
there's a
stuff.
little bit. There's a little bit. Um, but I definitely lean more toward like other ways to solve problems and
You love gut punches and let's make people think.
Maybe that's why I love your action scenes, because you are someone who is like, I enjoy these, but they're not the most important thing for me first. And I'm like, me too. Thank you.
yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe that's the best way to say it then, is like action scenes are really important, but they're only important when they relate to the story and the characters. Like we can write about characters doing cool stuff like, swishing their sword around and being extremely skilled with a gun or whatever. Like those are all cool moments, but they're memorable when like those moments are impactful to the character, they're impactful to the plot. Um, I joked about chapter 14 being mostly action. It is mostly action. I wasn't kidding about that.
And there's really cool moments too
Yeah.
for listeners.
Yeah, like the lead in to that action is this very tense like walk up to the front door and you have this negotiation with someone, and the whole point of that negotiation is to stall time. Like it's a very unequal amount of information where the point of view character is just trying to stall for time, and the person they're negotiating with is trying to get something. And I think that dynamic is really interesting. And so when the fight does happen, the main character, the point of view character, fully anticipates that, whereas the person they were speaking to feels betrayed. And it just like all hell erupts. So that fight scene in particular was probably the most fun one for me because it was so emotionally charged and there were so many different emotions going on.
I also love that we get the perspective of like the people that are like waiting outside there and they're like, has anything happened yet? I don't know. Have
Yeah,
you heard any gunshots? I haven't.
it
It's
was so
amazing.
good. It's so cinematic because I feel like those like scenes kind of happen a lot of times in movies, and it's like, oh yeah, I can picture this exactly. Like,
Yeah, I've had the book compared to like John Wick and Mission
Oh,
Impossible
I can see
and like
that.
a
oh
whole
yeah,
bunch of different films like that. But that scene in particular was actually inspired by one of Brian McClellan's books, and I forget which one it was, but I think it was part of the original Powder Mage trilogy, where there is a shootout and it's like roughly 18th century French Revolutionary setting, but fantasy, and there's magic and all that kind of stuff. Um, and there's a scene where they're trying to capture this mage or someone who's kind of been elusive throughout the majority of the plot. And there's this big shootout between like horse carriages and they're using muskets and stuff. And there's multiple point of view characters in that story. And if I remember right, you see like 75% of the scene through one point of view, and then you backtrack to like 60% and continue it through the rest of the way through a different point of view. And I just thought that was such a really fun way to tell a story.
yeah,
I love to like when it makes sense to do so, to show the same moment from different perspectives. I love to do that.
so good.
It was really fun.
Awesome.
Well, before we wrap up here, first of all, thank you for coming on. We absolutely loved your
Yeah,
books.
thank you for
Everybody
having
needs to
me.
be picking them up.
Please
But
do.
yes, pick them up now. What are you doing? Stop listening to our podcast and go read Adam's books. But Adam, what are you currently reading, watching, and or enjoying?
I am currently listening to the Mushroom Blues
Ah,
audiobook. I'm working
good
on
book.
a
Adrian?
Yep. I'm currently working on some maps right now, and that has been really fun to listen to while I'm doing that. I'm also reading in paperback. I got a book from my friend Nita Voss. She wrote Neon Noir, and
Mm.
it's the first of a, I believe, trilogy of cyberpunk stories. I'm only like roughly 50 pages or so in, but it's got a really cool setting so far, and I'm really enjoying it. Um, I think that's it. I haven't been watching anything recently.
That's fair. It's hard sometimes.
Yeah, I
It's
saw
hard to
Arcane a
balance
few
it
months
all.
ago. That was pretty good.
Ooh, shout
Yeah.
out.
Well, do you have any new works that we should be watching out for, or where can also people get Animus Paradox?
So yeah, Animus Paradox and Digital Extremities are both available pretty much everywhere. The ebooks are on just about anywhere you can get ebooks. I will say for Digital Extremities, there's a extra bonus content stuff up on Campfire.
Mm.
Um, and if you want to go check that out, you can get access to like extra character art and a few details about the settings. There's an extra flash fiction piece in there as well. Um, just a little something extra if you're enjoying it. Um, so ebooks everywhere, paperbacks, I believe are on like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop. The paperback for Animus Paradox won't be out until next month, February 17th. I had a slight delay with the logistics of getting a proof and checking that and everything, but it is on the way. I have my proof on my desk. Just a few small fixes and it'll be ready. So we're very close to that as well. Um, you asked about what's next. We're taking a
Yeah.
hard shift.
Oh,
Yay.
We're jumping over to a nonfiction reference book for authors who are interested
mhm.
in world building and map design. Um, so that has actually been a super fun project for me because I get to yap about maps. But also, I've been able to bring on other cartographers, people who make fictional maps, as well as at least one who does just cartography as a job. Um, and I've also been able to bring on some authors to talk about their settings and the maps that they made for their worlds. And so it's not just me telling you what I think is best, it's also me sharing their thoughts and some of the ways that they approach map design. So, like we mentioned, Adrian M. Gibson, his story Mushroom Blues, has a map that he made. He actually made that with his father, who is, I believe, also a cartographer. Um,
He has the most fascinating life.
He does.
um, yeah, no, it's hearing him talk
It's
about it
just
is really
not fair.
cool. Uh, but I think I don't know if they concepted it together and then he finished it, or if they did it all together. But they put the map together based on a 1990s-ish map of, I believe it was Tokyo, and then like interpreted that through his setting of like this fungal world where these mushroom people live there and the humans have come and occupied it. Um, and it is like put onto a backdrop of like this uh, binder paper, just because that's the context in which the characters of the story would acquire it, and you actually you kind of see that in the book as well. Like they reference like the Outsider's Guide to Neo Kanoko or
Oh
something,
yeah.
and that map is in that book. So he's like really integrated it into the world in some interesting ways, and so he has a small section in this book where we share that story a little bit and dig into how it works and everything. And I touch on stuff like geology and culture and basics of map design with like what text do you use, So it's gonna have a little something for everybody, I think, and a lot of different points of view for you to look at, and a bunch of maps inside of it. So that'll be fun.
I'm definitely going to pick
That's
that up
awesome.
because I read a Lemony Snicket book when I was a little kid, and for a period of time, I was like, I'm going to be a cartographer. It did not pan out, but I will relive my childhood dreams through this book.
Perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, and then after that, I've got some fiction ideas planned, but that has not started yet. So it's not really like I don't even 100% know what I'm doing.
No, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on publishing today. We're so
Yay.
excited to be
Thank you.
supporting
Thank you
this
so
book.
much.
Can you also tell our listeners where you can be found online if they want to check you out and follow along to wait for your nonfiction book to drop?
Yeah, so the best place to reach me is on my website, adamcbassett.com. I have a newsletter up there as well. You can get signed copies of the paperbacks there as well. And aside from that, I am at Adam C. Bassett on BlueSky, Instagram, Threads. I exist on Twitter, but it's just like major updates at this point. I'm kind of dropping that one right now. But yeah, probably the newsletter. If you're like really interested in the map design book or any future cyberpunk stuff or anything along those lines, that is where you're going to have the easiest access to that news.
Well, thank you again for coming on. We
Yes, thanks so much,
enjoyed
Adam.
you.
Yeah,
You're
thank you.
welcome back
Thank you both as
anytime.
well.
If you ever want to come geek out about maps, Laura is ready.
Hey,
I'm down.
we might need a special episode for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We can have a special bonus episode just for maps. So, and then everyone, you can find us on all the social media platforms we exist on at OWWR Pod. You can always find our link tree on Instagram. Usually that's a good representation of everywhere we are at or able to be. And please always remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And make sure you're checking out this week's bonus episode this week and, all of the good things in between. All right. Well, thank
thanks
you
for listening
again.
today.
Yeah. And thank you, Adam.
Thanks,
Welcome
Adam.
anytime.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.